Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled, If You Can't Dazzle Them with Brilliance, Baffle Them with BS. Now, shortly after 1985, I and another classmate of mine were upgrading to be 737 first officers, co-pilots. And normally they'd like to pair you as a crew, a captain upgrade and a co-pilot upgrade, but a lot of times that's just not possible. So it was us two guys together as co-pilots. So we'd take turns sitting in the right seat, and then the other guy would kind of play captain and stuff like that. Now, it was my first time through training as a flying position, so it was a lot of fun. But the funny thing was, this was right after 1985, very shortly after there, where we had this little strike thing. And it lasted 28 days, and they brought some people in from the outside to work during this time. And when it was over rather quickly, it was kind of like, well, what do we do with these people? We need to kind of protect them, the company said. So they put them in the training center. And, well, that was interesting because a lot of them really weren't qualified to be instructors. They didn't know our company procedures. And that kind of became apparent very quickly. All right, so we get in the simulator. We're going through the syllabus. We've got various things we're going to do, take off and stuff like that. And I was doing one takeoff, and I was used to flying the T-30H. You got to be fairly aggressive on getting the gear up, and I got a little too early here, and I rotated, and I saw that we had broke ground, from the visual in the simulator, and I said, positive rate, gear up. And the guy retracted it, and then the instructor leaned forward and said, well, you need to have positive rate on the VVI. And I looked at him for a second. I said, no, you don't. I said it can be visual or it can be VVI. Either way is acceptable. It's in the FOM 106.7 where it says either way is acceptable. And my friend kind of looks at me and, across the cockpit and like, what? So the instructor says nothing. Okay. Well, we're going on, and I'm doing a non-precision approach, and I'm coming down to the MDA, and let's say the MDA is at 500 feet, and I'm hand flying, and I didn't do the best job. I went down to like 460 feet before I came back up, and I corrected back up, and he says, you went below MDA. And I said, well, you're allowed to do that. I said, because weather reporting, when they report a ceiling such as like 500 feet, it can actually be a ceiling from 451 feet up to 549 feet. So you're allowed a 50-foot degradation below the MDA to ascertain weather. And I went down. I saw that, I couldn't see anything. So I came back up. And I said, that's covered in the FOM 134.67. And they didn't say anything. Well, next day we come into the simulator, and I'm thinking, well, they probably went and looked this up, and we were going to have a big laugh about it. And they would say, you got me, because they don't know our procedures coming from the outside. But they didn't say a thing. And I think I went and looked up, I think page 106 at the time had to do with the female wearing of the flight uniform or something like that. It had nothing to do with flying the airplane. But these guys never looked it up. And I could quote, I just made up pages out of the FOM quoting for, if I screwed something up, I'd make up a reference in the FOM that would justify it. As long as it wasn't too egregious, I got away with it. And I started writing this up as a critique, because their instruction kind of and their understanding of procedures really was not adequate. And I joke, well, it's up to page 2, now it's up to page 3. But we had some things like, okay, we're going to have an engine failure on takeoff, and I said, great. I said, how do you teach maintaining runway heading? I mean, what are your techniques? Crickets. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention there were two flight instructors. There was one guy that was being upgraded to be a 737 flight instructor, and the other guy supposedly was the senior guy. Both these guys had worked during the strike, and all in all, they weren't very good flight instructors. And when I said, well, what reference do you have? And it was absolutely quiet. I said, well, how about if I use the heading bug? Would that be a good idea? And they go, oh, yeah, that'd probably be a good idea. That'd be great. Yeah. Oh, okay. Wonderful. Thanks for the help. Well, then we got into this, and I'd been a flight examiner at Stanival out the Air Force Flight Test Center, and on the 38, visual descent points, which is what this little thing is. It's usually not circled in red, but that's a visual descent point. And these were kind of critical for a high-performance aircraft because you want to know if you're coming in for example, a dive and drive situation where you go down the MDA and you're coming up. You want to know at what point you should pick up the runway for a normal descent down for landing. If you go past what you compute or what is depicted, see, we also had to figure out how to compute them because many times they weren't depicted. So we would compute a visual descent point, and if you went past that point, you were going to start to be steep on the descent if you picked up the runway. So that was kind of important to know because you didn't want to get to the point where, with poor visibility, where you don't have good visual references, where you see the runway and you dive towards it and you don't realize that you're in kind of a high sink rate, and it can be a bad thing. So I saw this and I go, wait, great. How does the company teach to do this? Crickets. And I said, what? The company doesn't have a technique? Well, of course, by now I realize that they didn't have a clue what the company did or did not have a technique. And the other part about their fantastic instructional ability is they didn't even know what this thing was other than that was a visual descent point. And they seem to be very proud that they knew what this was on the chart. No other knowledge, but they knew what this V meant. Well, we continued along with the training there, and we got through it. We completed it, and now we're out. So I'm joking, like I mentioned about my critique. It's up to 4 pages, up to 5 pages. It ended up being 6 pages, single space typed. I would go home after training center and just write up all the things these guys didn't know about, screwed up, or taught wrong. Well, of course, that went up. It actually, if I remember correctly, it actually got one of them removed as an instructor, and it made a lot of waves in the training center, but it also had an unfortunate fallout. See, now here I'm out on the line, and I'm flying, and I get a line check. No notice line check. And it was kind of funny. The guy giving us the line check was an individual who had very low respect among the pilots. And the captain was a guy who was a real character. He is rather a legend at our airline. And we're doing a trip on the 737. We come in and we land at some little airport, and it was very common, and it really wasn't that good of an idea, but to shut down the right engine because the baggage stuff was on the right. You want it shut down so they could pull the carts up right away, but it should have had a little bit of a cool down period, but guys kind of didn't adhere to that, so they would be quick on shutting it down. Well, we are rolling out on the runway, and the captain reaches over and he shuts down the right engine. Well, when the captain does that, that had kind of been my key in training, that when he shuts down the engine, I can bring up the flaps. So I start bringing up the flaps, and this examiner, line check airman, reaches over and leans over to me and says, the FAA considers you flying when you're on the runway. You shouldn't have brought the flaps up. And the captain, without missing a beat, turns to him and says, well, hell, if we're flying, what should I have done? The in-flight engine shutdown procedure checklist? Says, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. And of course, that kind of quieted him down. We got to the gate, and he debriefed me, and he says, well, you did a good job, and I said, okay, well, I just come out of training. I should know what I'm doing. He says, well, no, I was told to give you a check ride because you had a bad attitude. And I go, oh, really? And, well, I kind of knew where this was coming from. And he says, yeah, I was told to give you a check ride because you had a bad attitude. And but you seem to have a fine attitude. You're friendly with the people. You were friendly with the captain. You were friendly with the flight attendants. I said, you don't seem to have a bad attitude at all. And I go, oh, well, that's nice to know. Thank you very much. So that was my punitive line check. Of course, it took a few years, but things got better, and no more of those sort of events occurred. But anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.